Hello guys, and welcome back to the Healthy Not Complicated podcast. Today we are going to be talking about a somewhat controversial new diet trend, sugar fasting or the sugar diet. Now, this is basically what it sounds like. It's where people are only consuming sugar, upwards of 300 grams of specifically simple sugar per day, and claiming that they are losing weight and specifically fat. They're feeling fantastic. They're having lots of energy. But is there more to the story? Sugar fasting, I've seen a few people who are kind of in the keto, low carb, carnivore diet, fasting space, switch over or start promoting the sugar diet or sugar fasting, which obviously it's the total opposite. When you're low carb or keto or even fasting, you're focusing mainly on fats and using fat for energy, fueling with fat, whether that's your stored body fat or dietary fat. And when you're only consuming sugar, you are not relying on fat at all because all of your energy is coming from sugar. Basically, the thinking behind sugar fasting is that you are providing your body a lot of energy very quickly, but it also boosts your dopamine, so you end up feeling really good. But can all that sugar be good for you? That's what we're going to get into in today's video. Hi guys, my name is Kait, and I'm a nutritionist who specializes in insulin resistance, blood sugar control, and weight loss. I've helped hundreds of clients reverse insulin resistance, lose weight, and feel better using natural strategies, diet, and lifestyle. A lot of my clients have been able to get off their medication for type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, that sort of thing. And so when I first heard of sugar fasting, it was from Mark Bell. If you have been in the low carb space for a while, he has been around for a while. He's a bodybuilder, I believe, and was a huge advocate for low carb ketogenic diets, the carnivore diet, for a very long time. So when all of a sudden he popped up on my Facebook feed and he was promoting eating candy and basically eating as much sugar as possible, limiting protein, limiting fat, and saying that he was losing weight, that he was leaner than ever, and that he felt fantastic, I was a little bit shocked. And looking more into this, it seems that he's not the only one. You guys also might be familiar with Cole Robinson, who is the creator of the snake diet, which is basically a protocol, a fasting protocol, where you fast for long periods of time, then do a refeed. And yeah, intermittent fasting, water fasting, dry fasting, that is basically the opposite of sugar fasting, because when you are fasting and you're not eating anything, that's when your body starts becoming more metabolically flexible and able to tap into your stored body fat better. But with sugar fasting, you are completely cutting that off and you're basically just giving your body a lot of sugar, which it either has to use right away or store. The idea of eating a high sugar, high carb diet isn't necessarily new. I can remember years and years ago, you guys are probably also familiar with Freely the Banana Girl and Durian Rider, who promoted, and I think still promote, a very high carb, high sugar vegan diet specifically. And there's a common thread with all of the people who are promoting sugar fasting and talking about how they feel so amazing, how they have so much energy, how they're losing weight, how they stay lean. The common thread here is that they are all very active and very metabolically fit people to begin with. These are people with very high energy demands. They are working out a lot. Mark Bell, like I said, he's a weightlifter. And if we're looking at someone like Cole Robinson, I'm pretty sure he does a lot of weightlifting as well and strength training. Durian Rider and Freely the Banana Girl, oh my God, I can't believe I'm even saying her name in this video, but they are very active as well, a lot of long distance cycling. So for someone who has high energy demands, they are able to use this energy quickly. They need more immediate energy, and they're going to be able to get through it and not experience those big swings in blood sugar like the rest of the general population would. Because if you eat something that's high in carbs, high in sugar, and then you exercise right afterwards, your body is able to use that energy right away to fuel your workout. And that's why things such as simple carbohydrates are good to have before you're doing something that requires glucose to fuel it. So any high intensity exercise, the primary fuel source for this is going to be glucose. So if you eat sugar and then you work out intensely right away, your body is going to be able to use that immediately for energy. And you will not experience as big of a spike in blood sugar as you would if you were to eat that same meal and then sit on the couch. So people who are promoting sugar fasting, they are a small minority of people, and their situation is not the same as the general population. The general population, most of which are insulin resistant to some degree, on track for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. If they're not already there, the general population is trending more towards being overweight, metabolically unhealthy. And as soon as you start to develop insulin resistance, which something like 88% of Americans do have some level of it. As soon as you start to develop it, your body isn't able to metabolize and handle carbohydrates as efficiently, and that includes sugar. So what this means is that when you eat these foods, your body isn't able to convert them to energy the way that they should. And this is why eventually over time, your fasting blood sugar will start to creep up, because the insulin resistance, the excess insulin that's being pumped out, won't be able to keep up with higher sugar, higher carb amount that's in your diet. So I can see why temporarily people who are very fit, very active are feeling good eating high quantities of sugar, just because it does spike your dopamine and it does provide very quick energy. But the vast majority of people nowadays do not need a quick energy source. They need a more stable, steady energy source, because this is what's going to lead to fewer cravings throughout the day, more stable energy long term throughout the day, fewer cravings because they won't be experiencing those spikes and crashes in their blood sugar. So people who are promoting sugar fasting, I think it's dangerous, because yes, this small group of people can get away with it because they are already metabolically healthy and they are exercising a lot, but the majority of people are not in that camp. And if you take someone who is insulin resistant, not yet pre-diabetic, but their cells are starting to resist insulin, they're starting to have a bit of trouble with blood sugar control, they're having cravings throughout the day, they're putting on weight, specifically around their midsection. People with insulin resistance will also develop skin tags around their neck and in their armpits. If you are someone who is insulin resistant in the early stages and you have this massive amount of sugar in a day, like I said, upwards of 300 grams of specifically simple sugar is what a lot of people are promoting. That's 300 grams of sugar that is going to enter your bloodstream. To put that into perspective, our body tries to maintain a blood sugar level of about 4 grams. That is the sweet spot. So yes, maybe they're not having 300 grams all at once, but 300 grams over the course of the day, that is a lot for the body to deal with. And especially if the body is already having trouble metabolizing carbohydrates and sugar, if carbohydrate stores in the body are already full, which they likely are in someone who's insulin resistant and not really tapping into that reserve of energy, because the body can store a limited amount of carbohydrates, glucose, glycogen to be exact, in our muscles and also in our liver. So someone with more muscle mass is also able to store more energy from carbohydrates, which also goes along with the people who are promoting this being more fit and why they're able to handle this better. But someone with less muscle mass and someone who isn't that active isn't really using these stored carbs. So when you add more to that situation, that's when the cells in the body start to resist insulin, which is bringing the excess sugar from the bloodstream to the cells. And when this happens, then that's when insulin resistance starts to occur, because the cells are like, nope, we're already full, we have enough energy, we can't take in any more. And then the body sees that blood sugar is still above, again, that 4 grams, and it goes, oh, something's not right, I'm gonna release more insulin. So more insulin is pumped out. And then what ends up happening in the early stages of insulin resistance is your blood sugar will look normal. So you might not be diagnosed with prediabetes or have any idea that anything's wrong at this point in time, but your insulin will be high. And that's because it's just taking more insulin to force the excess glucose into your cells. And it's the high levels of insulin that lead to a lot of the side effects that come from insulin resistance and eventually prediabetes. Because insulin is a growth hormone. And when insulin levels are high, you're going to be more likely to store fat, especially around your midsection, especially around your liver and your organs. Insulin resistance is a huge driver for fatty liver. This is also why it causes skin tags to grow, because again, it's a growth hormone. So those people who are very active, they might be getting through their stored carbs and they might need to replenish them in order to be able to fuel their workouts. But vast majority of people, even if you're a casual exerciser, even if you go to a workout class every single day, I can almost guarantee you are not depleting your glycogen stores. And you don't need this quick energy to fuel your workouts. There's also the risk of inflammation going up when you're consuming so much sugar, because it is inflammatory. And I've just spoken about insulin resistance so far, but if your insulin resistance has progressed to prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, then you will already know that you are having more trouble keeping your fasting blood sugar down. You will already know that your blood sugar stays higher than it should for longer than it should after you eat. So I can only imagine what we would see if someone who was type 2 diabetic were to eat these massive amounts of sugar, were to go on a sugar fast. It is insane to me. And let me tell you, I looked through quite a few testimonials, if you will, about sugar fasting and about the sugar diet. And like I said, all of them were very fit people. And I think it's really harmful to be putting the message out there that sugar is the answer when we have so much evidence that suggests otherwise. The other issue is when you are doing a sugar fast, you are not getting any other micronutrients really, especially if you are relying on processed simple sugars as some of these people are promoting. Yes, the likes of like Durian Rider, they're eating mainly fruit, so there will be some micronutrients and electrolytes in that. But some of these newer guys, no, they're promoting pure candy. And the thing is that the body actually does not require any sugar or any carbohydrates for that matter to survive and function optimally. There are essential proteins, which are amino acids, and there are essential fats, which are fatty acids, but there is no essential carbohydrate. And that is because our bodies can make sugar internally out of other substances. So we don't actually have to consume it. Whereas with some of these amino acids and with some of the fatty acids, our bodies can't make them or can't make them in big enough amounts. So we have to get them through our diet. So that is why people feel so good on low carb keto diets, because they're eating mainly fat and protein. They're getting those micronutrients that they need. They're getting those essential like amino acids, and they're limiting sugar and carbs, which, like I said, sugar, it does have its place specifically for people who are very active and have very high, intense energy needs. And that's the pro of simple sugars. They're broken down quickly, they're digested quickly, and they can fuel you quickly. But most people do not need that. They need more steady energy without those big crashes and falls in blood sugar. And yes, there is going to be a dopamine hit, but that's also going to come with a crash, and you can definitely become a little bit addicted to it, and in which case you keep needing more and more and more. And that is a dangerous cycle to get into. Even with things that aren't related to food or aren't related to sugar, you can get dopamine hits and you can get addicted to it. But it's even worse when you're getting it from something like sugar that has other negative consequences on the body. Feeling good in the short term doesn't equal being healthy. And if you're relying on sugar for this emotional reward, you are going down a dangerous path. Now, there's debate over whether sugar addiction is real, but as someone who used to eat a lot of carbs and a lot of sugar and would feel pretty crap if I didn't eat these foods, I don't know. It felt pretty real to me. And I hear this all the time with people who find it's easier to just cut carbs completely down in their diet, cut sugar completely out, rather than have a little bit, or rather than eat in moderation, which again is why low carb diets, intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets are so effective, because people find that they can kind of break their relationship with sugar. They don't need to be eating it all the time. And that does also tie in with blood sugar issues and the spike that sugar causes and the subsequent crash, but it is emotional as well. And the reason that I think this trend has sort of blown up is that everyone is looking, well, in the online space at least, everyone is always looking to take things one step further. They're always wanting to try the next thing. And we see this with the pipeline where people start out at paleo, and then they go low carb, then they go keto, then they go carnivore. It just gets more and more extreme. And I do kind of see the appeal. It is fun to be on this space online and kind of always chasing the next thing. But if you actually want to live a healthy lifestyle, this isn't sustainable. And that's where I, in the past, have went down this pipeline. I do think that low carb and ketogenic diets, even the carnivore diet, can be very, very, very effective. But I do also now recognize that not everybody has to be that strict. And I hate to use the word balance. I'm not going to use it, but you can have a more relaxed approach. And instead of focusing on specific macros or specific calories or percentages, instead, if you focus on certain principles, if you focus on never eating carbs in isolation, focusing all your meals around protein, not fearing fat, having an early dinner, drinking apple cider vinegar, that sort of thing, incorporating some form of intermittent fasting, even if that just means skipping snacks throughout the day. If you can do these little things, you are going to get big results. And it doesn't have to be some big, strict diet. You don't need to go out and every time you're eating out with people go, oh, I can't eat that, I'm doing keto. You can kind of use this framework and use these habits to live your life and to make the best choices you can as often as you can. And that's what's going to add up over time. So doing these strict sugar fasts or even a strict carnivore diet, yes, it's going to, well, maybe not sugar fasting, but carnivore and whatnot, you might feel good short term, but are you going to be able to maintain the results? Or are you treating it as a diet and something that's going to be temporary? Because if you go straight back to how you were eating beforehand, if you've lost all your weight, if you've reversed your insulin resistance, but then you go back to the standard American diet, your insulin resistance is going to come back because it is that diet and the lifestyle choices you are making that got you to that point in the first place. And that's actually what my last podcast episode was about. I was talking about if you can go back to a normal diet after you reverse insulin resistance. And I'll link that video up above or put it in the description box if you're on Spotify. But short answer is when your insulin resistance reverses, you have regained your tolerance and your ability to metabolize carbohydrates to some degree. So you will be able to eat more of them and not suffer the same side effects you would have when you were insulin resistant. However, like I said, if you go entirely back to a standard American diet, then it's just going to come back. And that's where if you've developed these habits and focus on the principles rather than specific foods, there's not really an end to the diet and you going back to your normal life. You kind of have just incorporated the changes into your life and it should be easy to maintain. Now, with all that being said, I do think fasting is extremely effective for reversing insulin resistance and for overall health. I don't think everybody needs to do OMAD 1 meal a day or even like 18 hours of fasting a day. I think between 12 and 16 hours of intermittent fasting per day and then eating 12 to 8 hour window is the sweet spot for most people where they're still able to develop that metabolic flexibility and train their body to utilize fat as an energy source more efficiently, but still be able to use carbohydrates when they are available. I think that is the sweet spot for most people, but extended fasting has so many more benefits. And I'm talking about fasting for 24, 48, 72 plus hours. Most of the benefits kind of tap out at about 72 hours unless you are very, very overweight, obese, then you have a lot of stored energy. So you will be able to fast for longer and still feel good and get those additional fat burning benefits. But if you can do anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, one fast, once a month, once a quarter, even once a year, you are going to see amazing benefits in terms of longevity, because what happens is when you do an extended fast, something called autophagy ramps up, and it's basically where your body cleans out any damaged cells that you have. I am a huge advocate for water fasting and doing an extended fast, and this is entirely different than a sugar fast. So when you're doing this type of fast, you want to make sure you are drinking enough water and adding electrolytes to your water. Yes, dry fasting is a thing where people do not consume any liquids. A lot of people won't even touch water because they don't want their bodies to absorb it through their skin, so they won't even shower during this time. But there honestly isn't enough evidence to support the benefits of dry fasting. It hasn't been researched heavily, whereas water fasting has and is truly supported by the literature. But like I said, you need to be doing it the right way. So when you're water fasting, you only want to be consuming water, electrolytes, specifically an electrolyte that doesn't have any sugar and that won't break a fast. You can also have black coffee and tea and anything else that has no calories, any other drink that has no calories. Now, there is a bit of a gray area here. Things like diet soda, yes, technically don't have calories, but there's debate over whether they break a fast or not because they're still sweet. So the sweet taste can trigger the release of insulin. Your body thinks there's sugar coming in, so it releases insulin. And the benefits of fasting, autophagy really kicks in when insulin is low. So if you're drinking diet soda while fasting, you are potentially increasing your insulin and taking away from the benefits. But if I can give you one tip, if you are trying to do an extended fast, or maybe you've tried to do even 24 hours in the past and found it very difficult, it would be to make sure you are using a quality electrolyte supplement. Because when we fast, when our insulin is low, we retain less water. And when we retain less water, we also retain fewer electrolytes. So it's really, really important to replenish them. If we don't replenish them, this is when we can suffer from headaches, fatigue, dizziness. And these are things that a lot of people do experience when they try to do an extended fast. And it's because they're just drinking plain water. And that's why I highly recommend Sodi's everyday hydration salts. They have no sugar, no artificial sweetener, and no additives, so they will not break your fast. Plus, they are high in sodium, which a lot of electrolyte supplements on the market aren't. There's this fear around sodium and salt and increasing blood pressure and worsening health. But when you are eating a whole food diet, when you've cut processed food out of your diet, you have cut out a lot of the sodium you would typically be getting. And sodium is actually an essential electrolyte. We just get so much of it in through our diet when we're eating a lot of processed food. But if we have switched to a more whole food diet, and specifically a diet that's lower in carbs, because again, lower insulin, retain fewer electrolytes, and especially if we're intermittent fasting, we need to replenish sodium. So sodium shouldn't be feared. If you've had another electrolyte supplement in the past during an intermittent fast, and you've been like, okay, I don't really notice a difference, try Sodi. They're an Australian company, but they do ship worldwide. And you can save 15% off your first order when you use code HCK15 at checkout. Head to healthcoachkait.com/Sodi electrolytes. That's SODII electrolytes to check them out and learn more. So in summary, yeah, sugar fasting does seem trendy. It can be fun to try different things out, especially if you're really into the health and wellness space, especially if you've tried a lot of these diets before and you're always trying to feel better and improve your health even more. But honestly, this isn't the way to go. For the vast majority of people who, like I said, are overweight, have some level of insulin resistance, a lot of people are already at the point where they're pre-diabetic, sugar fasting is going to make things way, way worse. You are not going to feel as good as some of these people you see online are feeling. Now, I want to hear from you guys because I know I've gotten a few comments over the last few weeks asking for my opinion on sugar fasting, but I'm sure a lot of you have never heard of this before. But I want to hear from you. Had you heard of this trend? Was it something that had actually piqued your interest and that you were maybe considering? No shame. Let me know in the comments down below. And if you have tried it, I would also love to hear from you. So let me know. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Share it with a friend who's curious about sugar fasting if you know someone. And if you're watching on Spotify, I would love if you could rate and review the podcast there. Thanks guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.